Hey everybody, welcome to One Human History. Johnny here, and we've got a very special episode for you today. As you know, it's a holiday season right now. Love is in the air. People are hugging and kissing and giving each other little chocolates that say, "Be mine." And that's how you know it's a very special holiday. President's
President's
Day.
Day.
Nice. That was close to unison. All right,
I
we
didn't even
practiced
say it.
that. President's Day.
Day.
President's
President's
Day.
President's
Day.
Day.
President's
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 Day.
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 Okay, I think we got it.
I think one of those
And
worked.
as you could already tell, I've brought to the podcast today a couple of guests. We have Conor, who you know from Presidents Suck. Hey, Conor.
Hi, everyone. Good to be back.
And we've got Langdon as well joining us. Hi, Langdon.
I listened to President Suck.
Awesome.
So
Yeah. So in honor of our President's Day holiday, I'm going to be doing something that Mr. Beat and all the great presidents nerds have done. I'm going to rank presidents, or rather, I'm going to put the presidents into a tier-based system. So this is not the same thing as ranking presidents from first to last. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put a certain number of presidents as F tier. I'm going to say they weren't that great. I'm going to put a certain amount of presidents in D tier where I'm like, I'm going to put them in the C tier where it's like, Brezhnev. I'm going to put them in the B tier where it's like they did some stuff. The A tier where it's like they did a lot of stuff, but they fucked something up really bad at one point. And the S tier where it's like they were awesome, great presidents. So that's going to be our ranking system today. What do you guys think about that?
I'm excited to put 45 people in the S tier.
45. You think 45 presidents deserve to be S tier, Conor?
Look, I love this country more than anyone I've ever met.
Well, so what I'm going to be doing, first of all, is I'd like to talk a little bit about how I'm going to be ranking these presidents. These ranking systems I consider to be fundamentally flawed. I think that it is impossible to say whether one president was better than another. There's absolutely no parameters that I know of for judging presidents. They serve in different times and different eras, but I'm just going to try to rank them based on which ones I think were the best at being president and which ones were the worst at being president. Now, if they trampled on a lot of people along the way, okay, but the point
that's
is,
kind of how
we're
it
going to
goes.
talk about how good they were at being president, because this is just a silly exercise for fun. It's a stupid thing that I think would be fun, and you'll get to hear a lot of facts about presidents along the way. So how does that sound?
I'm excited because I know very little about presidents, so I feel like I'll be learning along with everybody.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, you could be the resident audience member and ask,
Exactly.
quintessential questions that Johnny and I wouldn't think of.
Yeah, like other than looks, what do we rate presidents on?
Well, we were talking before, but I'm going to be rating the presidents on how many people they killed.
I think Harry Truman might have to be your top president for dropping the atom bombs.
I'm already a big fan.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Apologies to the island of Honshu, and here we go. So let's begin with, we're going to go in order. We're going to start with President Washington and go all the way to President Biden. So George Washington. I'm going to put George Washington as an S tier president.
Wow, I can't believe it.
I say I call Pashaisha on that. I think well, tell us what you think about George Washington. Why do you like him?
Where would you put him?
I don't know. I'd say he's like a C, a little bit below.
He never told a lie.
I definitely didn't. I mean, there's just like the more you like get into presidents, the more you hear about like what they were actually like. But I want to hear what Johnny has to say about why George Washington is a S tier. And
I have a lot of issues with George Washington, and there's a lot of things that he did that I don't agree with. I don't think that he was even necessarily that good of a president in the sense of talent. Get up there, go. Hey, this is my show. I believe that George Washington did something that no other president in this list can boast of, which is he set up the two-term tradition. that the leader retires from office, and that's huge. He also modeled the presidency, like he molded it. He created the golden standard which other presidents judged themselves by, and he managed to there was no precedence for his presidency, and he managed to get through 8 years with quite a lot of, there was a rebellion and other things, but fairly peacefully. He kept us out of war with France, and he left on time. So that's S tier right there. He's on the freaking dollar, guys.
Okay.
The number one currency on Earth is his baseball card.
S tier, or does it have to be paper money? Is he your platonic ideal of a president?
Not mine. He's the platonic ideal of a president. He's the one that all these guys get excited about.
I think one of the things that you brought up is actually a reason why I don't respect George Washington. I think that his handling of the French was really sad. Lackluster would be a really nice way of putting it. But the French really helped us gain our independence from England, and then when they needed to figure out and get some help, he was not really interested in saving their people, if you would, giving them any assistance. Even though I know that comes into play, later, he was certainly not a fan of doing it. He was definitely an isolationist, which in many ways is good. I feel like, in particular with the French, they helped us so much that we really owed it to them.
But he was also he was also a superstar around the world. He was an inspiration to other democratic uprisings and anti-empire uprisings. He was also a bad person. I have this, maybe it's a cynical view, but like, I don't think nice people become presidents. I think.
Well, I have a point on that, and I think this will go towards why, this would go more towards why you'd like him. But I was just talking with someone yesterday, or 2 nights ago, actually, about the crossing of the Delaware painting. And I didn't know this. You may know this, but I just learned, it could be not real, but I just learned that that was actually done on Christmas, that there was a Christmas ceasefire that was signed by the U.S. and Britain. And then on Christmas, George Washington was like, we're going to kill him anyway.
But those were Hessian troops from Germany, so technically he may not have been violating the ceasefire.
I mean, all's fair in love and war, yeah?
So, and you said you wanted the president who killed the most people. You said that.
I did. He did. He killed quite a bit.
Conor's definitely. Yeah, he was called. He has had He had a nickname from an Indian group from New York, Pennsylvania area today, Conoctarius or something, which meant destroyer of towns. So
okay.
All right, so let's go to our second president, John Adams. Actually, the first presidential site I ever visited was Quincy, Massachusetts, where he was born.
I was saying Langdon right now. Put him in the A. What do you think, Johnny?
Yeah, I would put him as a C.
Whoa.
Yeah. I think that John Adams did not have the personal fortitude to be a successful president. He was too out of touch with what was going on during his administration. He particularly
checked out.
No, like he was above it. He thought he was so smart and so above it all that he was missing the point a lot of times of what was going on in the country. And that was especially evident in how he handled the press, which was terribly. He censored the press. Like he couldn't handle what America was. He was too theoretical, in my opinion. And he was also just like a grumpy, dour guy. Now, I love John Adams, and I think he's one of the great Americans, but I don't think he's a S tier president. He's a C tier president for sure.
Were they still really old when was he 60, 70 when he was president?
I suppose he
He,
might have been in his elder years, but maybe he was in his 50s.
Do you think
Okay.
he was just too old to like to be in sync with Americans?
No, I just think he didn't understand it the way that George Washington did. And he also had 8 years of being a vice president and feeling like, nobody's listening to me. And then like he became president. He's like, now they'll all have to listen to me and kiss the ring. And he was just bad at it. And Thomas Jefferson just wiped, like, out of
I
my way,
definitely get
little
that.
chunky man.
I definitely understand that. I think he did so much work to get to where he was. I feel,
Mm-hmm.
like the Massachusetts Constitution was something widely copied, not just
Yeah.
in the country's documents, but also as state documents. That's still the Constitution for Massachusetts today. He was anti-intervention. He was anti-slavery. He was anti overconsumption, anti-consumerist. To what degree you could be at that time period, he was real simple. He and his wife, made themselves from the ground. Well, he made himself from the ground up. His wife comes from a slightly better stock, but like I got a lot to look at and admire about. But yeah, I guess he wasn't actually a good president.
Okay, I can't find the statistic, but slavery increased in like the number of slaves in the United States massively increased in the 4 years that John Adams was president. So,
That's
um,
a really weird statistic. I wonder why that's true. I wonder what was happening during the time. There's probably a good chance that people just didn't respect him and what he wanted to do, which is being not a good president. If you can't actually use your power, then you're not a good president.
well, there's also a difference between being like, I'm against slavery and therefore I'm going to use the government to root it out of our country. And I'm against slavery, but what are you going to do? You got to get along with the South. You got to get along with them. What are you going to
Yeah,
do?
yeah, yeah.
Which is John Adams in those 4 years. And then after he was president, much like Carter, built a lot of houses after he did a bad job being president. Uh, um, John Adams like started to like speak out more against slavery after his presidency. But during his presidency, I mean, he did little things here and there, I'm sure, but overall wasn't really that helpful to the anti-slavery cause.
But you said Jefferson was way better, or wiped the floor with Adams.
Yeah,
So where does he land?
Thomas Jefferson is going to be a B tier, I think.
Oh,
Yeah. And the reason I think Thomas
What did he
Jefferson
do? Why? Why?
is a B tier is he interrupts a pretty, we could argue that the Jay Treaty, which was a sort of like exclusive rights to Britain treaty that we had, not exclusive rights, but it was like a preferred trading status we had going with Britain. And like he ran on like, I'm going to get rid of it, kind of like Trump running on I'm going to get rid of NATO and like that kind of thing. And I don't necessarily think that we needed to get out of that agreement so badly. And he had no plan what to do to replace it with. Like he was like, we're going to replace it with an alliance with France. Well, that didn't happen for two reasons. One, because George Washington didn't help them out. And two, because France was like, it was impossible for France to get to the United States because the British Navy just increased their presence because of Thomas Jefferson's trade wars. And by the end of Thomas Jefferson's administration, he enacted this terrible embargo that basically crippled the United States economy and ensured that the US would go to war with Great Britain. But he left office before it happened and left that to his successor, James Madison, to figure out. So
so
really,
what saves Jefferson in your mind from being a
Yeah,
D or an F?
that
I
sounds
think
bad.
honestly, this is going to sound frivolous, but he brought the presidency back down to earth after 4 years of Adams and just the craziness of that administration. He was more down to earth. Like he dressed more like a common person. He was interesting. He was intellectual. He brought some pizzazz and class to the White House, but he also made it more accessible to people and he demystified the institution of the presidency in a big way. And he also left being like, being president sucks. I'm leaving it off my tombstone. So I think it's kind of cool. It's a little bit punk that he presidented that way.
That is pretty punk to be
That's
like,
pretty sad.
I did better things than be president. And I guess he kind of did.
You're saying what he did for the presidency as an office was a lot better than what he did for America as a country.
Oh, he left America holding the bag for sure.
And
But
he's
he
a
did get the
B.
Louisiana. He did got the Louisiana Purchase though. That's, I mean, he doubled the size of America for shillings on the
Yeah.
dollar, whatever that would mean.
You're right. That's another reason why he's a B tier that I didn't think of in the moment, but that adds to him being a B tier for sure. Do you know who's next?
Yeah,
James Madison.
we got a big what's a big Federalist Papers boy.
Yeah.
It says
I'm
it
gonna have
says
to
here
give
he's a Democratic Republican.
yeah, I'm gonna have to give him maybe a D.
You said that he picked up a shit bag from the last guy, Jefferson.
Right, but that doesn't mean he was like, "Oh, what my predecessor did was wrong and I should
Oh,
walk it back."
oh,
He was like, "Okay, like, we're gonna." I mean, he held the British off for 4 years. He kind of did like a Woodrow Wilson, where he held Europe off for 4 years, got reelected, and then started the war. Um, I think that's how it
Sure.
happened. Maybe he got elected the same year the war started, but it was like his election and the war were very close together in time when the war broke out. But he I don't know as much about Madison, but he attempted to get a Bank of the United States started and was completely unable to do so. He did not have he wasn't a big charmer. He wasn't a very impressive person. People thought he was kind of like a deflated balloon. His wife looked amazing. It was very personable and was like was definitely an S tier first lady. But so she made the presidency a lot better. But he himself was kind of a wet noodle, in my opinion. And he also, he mismanaged the war effort in 1812 and ended up
Yep.
fleeing from the White House as it was like in flames. You know, his own slaves joined the British to fight against the United States under his reign. Like he lost the country basically for like a few months completely. Like he completely lost the United States for a few months or so. And then a few things happened and he managed to get control of the country again and he signed a peace treaty. So he's not an F tier, but I can't see a lot of good in Madison.
How do you feel about his involvement with Native Americans trying to help, but ultimately leading to a huge, one of the biggest problems in U.S. Native American relations?
Some of the worst Indian wars, Indian massacres of American history were under Madison. William Henry Harrison made a name for himself killing people during the War of 1812. Tecumseh was killed during the War of 1812. Like it was like Madison's speeches drummed up anti-Native American sentiment and was like they're at our border and the British are arming them to shoot at Americans, so we have to go in there and like take that territory. Um,
Um, James Madison was then succeeded by the last founding father. How do you feel about America's final founding father?
James Monroe. James Monroe gets a B.
That's pretty good. I'm
Yeah.
surprised.
He
Monroe Doctrine.
wasn't a particularly impressive person compared to the other founding fathers. His mystique and his prestige was a lot less than George Washington. He was kind of a poor man's George Washington. That's sort of how he, if you could say, marketed himself. And it's one of the reasons why he was the only president to run unopposed for reelection.
Hmm.
So
That's pretty good.
I have to give you a B if the country is like we don't even need to like have a election. Like
yeah, for sure.
not like now at that point in history if they were just like who's gonna run against him. But there's also like a Brezhnev factor to the James Monroe. And if you don't know what Brezhnev factor means, it's a term I made up, which means Brezhnev was the leader of the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union stagnated. And as a result, even though his reign was peaceful, it set the stage for crazier things that were going to happen. So the rise of Andrew Jackson, the stage is set because of Monroe's sort of Brezhnev kind of, he was just sort of a flat president. The economy wasn't actually that great for a lot of his presidency, but he did manage to get things rolling again. He did increase the size of the territory. He took in Florida, but he was very in those days there was a line of succession to the presidency, Secretary of State, but a bunch of people in his cabinet wanted to be president that year. And so John Quincy Adams wasn't automatically the guy. And John Quincy Adams was, like his father, not very charming. So like a lot of other people were like, oh, I could beat John Quincy Adams if I could run. And so there was this war that he didn't really control in his own cabinet. So his cabinet was very ununited. But and it led to a very contentious election at the end of his 8 years. So he's kind of similar to Obama in the sense that it's like 8 years of chill followed by some craziness. And it's because there was a stagnation under his leadership. But he did do a great thing to unify the country. He went on a tour of the entire United States and walked in parades and met Americans and was like, hi, I'm the president of the United States, which increased the culture of democracy in the country and led to things like the culture of public debate, like Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas having these 3-hour-long debates, these big performances where people would debate ideas and stuff like that. That's a culture of democracy. So I give him a higher grade for increasing that culture of democracy in the country.
How do you feel about the Monroe Doctrine, which is probably arguably the biggest thing he's remembered for?
Well, in 2022, I don't defend it, but in the context from Monroe's point of view, you'd have to admit that through the Monroe Doctrine, he set a pillar of strength for the United States and its power. So the Monroe Doctrine, from the perspective of the United States, was a net benefit. It grew our power and it made us a bigger country and a stronger country overall because it gave us basically free reign in the Western Hemisphere to do what we want and be, it wasn't necessarily the original intention of the Monroe Doctrine to do that, but that's what it became.
But it's kind of like a Jimmy Carter situation where it's like to help initially, and then of course people take advantage of it.
Well, it was like keep the European empires out of the Western Hemisphere so that all these democracies can come into existence in the Western Hemisphere. And so you'll actually see Monroe's name in other countries. You'll see streets named after James Monroe. In Argentina, I saw James Monroe Street. There's a country, Liberia, whose capital city is called Monrovia after James Monroe. So he's also a legend of democracy.
So at the end of the founding fathers, we then start a new presidential tradition, which is the election of the son. You have
nepotism.
The dad. Yeah, nepotism's a way better way to put that. You want to talk about some nepotism with our next guy, John Quincy Adams?
John Quincy Adams goes right next to his dad.
Where is he?
He's on the bottom row next to FDR, James K. Polk. There he is. Yep, you got him.
This is him?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't use his... It's not the same as the one on Wikipedia.
Well, you're going to have to complain to the tier company about that.
What makes John Quincy Adams an astoundingly boring president?
I don't know if he was boring. I mean, he's skinny dipped in the Potomac River, but
I've done that.
Yeah.
Sick, dude.
So he was elected in a very dubious way, first of all. He expected to be president because it was like everyone before him was Secretary of State. And he was Secretary of State, so he got to be next. But he was different from the rest of them in that he wasn't a founding father. He was just a founding son or something. Hey. Son of the revolution, he's the next generation. And he's just like, well, I'm the most qualified to rule this country since I'm of the next generation. And a lot of people were like, no, and they ran against him. Not just Andrew Jackson, not just Andrew Jackson. A lot of people in his own party ran against him. Henry Clay, like people ran against him too. And so basically what ended up happening is Andrew Jackson entered the race, and he was such a like Trumpian figure that when they had the election, Quincy Adams was behind Jackson. And so they kind of maneuvered, the rest of the candidates kind of maneuvered themselves together for the re-election, which happened in the House of Representatives, to put all their votes behind John Quincy Adams so that this crazy Jackson would be denied the presidency. And so he started his term with, like George W. Bush, with, you weren't fairly elected, you're illegitimate president, which is the shittiest way to start.
Yeah.
Like, that's
really
just
handicaps you.
It's a huge handicap. He just didn't have the authority to claim the mantle. So, I mean, even if he had the legal authority, he couldn't really exercise the presidential authority. And he wasn't malleable enough to learn how to change his behaviors. He was so convinced that he was right. And he had a lot of great ideas. People always bring up John Quincy Adams' ideas about universities and public spending and banking. And he does do a lot of stuff. He's kind of like Biden in the sense that he gets a lot of things done too that don't get credited because people just think of him as the loser who had to give the presidency to Andrew Jackson. But
one thing that you didn't mention in that list that you definitely talked about when we talked about him on our President Suck episode was that when his father was president, he was an ambassador. And I believe that he did quite a bit for our foreign affairs and our interaction with other countries that we weren't talking to before.
I kind of now feel bad about giving him the same rank as his dad because I feel like he's better than his dad, but he's not better enough. He's still C tier.
So he's like C plus.
Yeah, he's like a C plus.
Okay.
All right, so let's move on now to Andrew Jackson.
Nothing wrong with him. Great guy.
Yeah. I'm gonna make
dressed like Count Dracula.
Andrew Jackson's tough. I'm gonna have to make him a C tier president.
Ooh, with the Addams family.
But he is the president that's on the front lawn. Why or not on the lawn, but on the little park thing, which name I'm forgetting. It's not the right time.
And he's on money.
He is on money, but he didn't like money. He was actually famously against the nationalization of not the church, of the bank.
I feel that Andrew Jackson brought a lot of tabloidy sort of scandal energy into the presidency that irrevocably scarred it. I think he thought he had more power than he actually had and did some awful things with it, including the Trail of Tears. And other terrible things to Native Americans. I think that he was against the bank, but he was also kind of a fuddy-duddy in general as far as his understanding of what the economy was and how it worked. The only reason I don't give him a D or an F is that he expanded the voter franchise to more white men, but to white men of lower class than had previously had the franchise. And he set the agenda that in the United States, the goal was going to be more people voting. So I think that that's good.
I mean, famously not a great guy. Lots of problems.
Like we said, there's not many great guys on this list.
Sure, but the next guy is even cooler. Martin Van Buren.
S.
Martin Van Buren.
You know it. I know it.
Has to be
an. I'm gonna give him an F. I think actually he might be one of our F tiers.
Okay.
No, I totally agree. Actually, my AP US history teacher, that was his favorite president, and we learned a lot about him. And I was like, no, this guy's garbage. What are you talking about?
Why do
My
you think
wife said he even has an S in his hair right here.
Oh wow! How about
so? Come on.
Why do you think he's so bad? Connor?
I just feel like he didn't really get a heck of a lot done that was good. He definitely did not do a good job with the Native Americans. He got into problems with the Republic of Texas. I don't believe he had good foreign affairs either. And I feel like there was just like a lot of turmoil during his. I don't feel like America was doing well during his presidency, which could also be Andrew Jackson's problem in ditching some of what he was not paying attention to Martin. But I feel like kind of the country during his tenure was not certainly not one of the best times to be there.
I think he's kind of like James Buchanan, where he has like a good mind for foreign affairs, but he's an out of touch president. He's a cloistered president. He's sort of cloistered off from the public. The country experiences a terrible economic catastrophe from the first month he's in office, and it doesn't get any better for 4 years. And he gets identified as this out of touch elitist who doesn't care. And he's actually one of the few non-Southern presidents who owned slaves, if not the only non-Southern president who owned slaves.
I didn't even realize that.
Kind of is like, yeah, and he was Dutch, so
really
it's like,
weird.
Boy, you guys really went out of your way to own slaves. Like the other guys own slaves, but you guys like really reached for that from New York State. Like,
wow, huh?
So
he's a D. He's our first F.
He's our first F.
And the only reason he's another one that he was just like he was Andrew Jackson's butt boy for so long that he got to be president. It wasn't like he was a popular figure that rose up to become president, and they voted him out 4 years later in a landslide.
I thought you said they stopped doing, like you said there was like an order of secession where the butt boy would become the next president, but I thought that broke around Andrew Jackson.
Yes, but then he set up his own version.
Okay, his own butt boys.
He sent this guy, Van Buren, who was a great political operator, but he wasn't a popular political figure of any kind.
The spoil system ran rampant in Andrew Jackson's tenure.
Yeah, and he mismanaged the economy. It crashed right after Jackson left. He was such a fuddy-duddy on banking that he left the United States really far behind in its development. At a crucial point, and we got into some terrible economic waters. And Van Buren couldn't clean him up. Neither could his replacement, William Henry Harrison, who is an F, obviously. That's
why is he an F?
He died a month into his presidency. Where is he?
Isn't that cool? It's the exact day.
It's there.
This is him, right?
April 4th.
Yeah.
Oh my God! It literally 1 month.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's wrong? What did he do? Or nothing?
Well, he did the longest inaugural address that any president had done, and he did it in the rain. He did it in the cold because they were like, "You're too old. You're too sick to run for president." And he's like, "I can even do it in the rain. I'm strong enough." And then he dies from exactly what they said was going to happen.
Is that true?
He basically that's more of it's a little bit of a mythical way of telling the story, but it's it's more or less true. Like the thing is, William Henry Harrison basically is the presidential equivalent of like somebody putting a picture of themselves from 30 years ago on their Tinder profile, and then you go to meet them and you're like, whoa, what, you're like almost in the crypt, what are you doing as president? What, are you serious? And so like he came to Washington, D.C., and he's like, I'll show them. And he gave this really long speech in the cold, which isn't what killed him, the scientists think, but it couldn't have helped. It could not have helped. Right? And
yeah, definitely couldn't have helped.
Yeah, like he may not have died from the pneumonia, but he was weakened by the pneumonia and probably was more vulnerable to whatever he died of a month later, which was like something like gastroenteritis, which is not his fault because the White House was a death trap at that time. The water was very disgusting. People died and got sick all the time, including presidents and first ladies living at the White House. So, but he sold himself as a young man. He came in, He died. I think he planned one session of Congress that was like an emergency session to talk about the economy, and then he died.
Sick.
So that's a failure.
So
That's a failed presidency.
I agree. And
Yeah,
the
I'd
next
say
guy.
so.
His
The
next
guy
guy,
even
John
cooler.
Tyler.
This is John Tyler?
Yeah. John
Okay.
Tyler. John Tyler, you got to give him a D. I'll put him in the D category.
We're not doing too hot for an office that hasn't even existed for 100 years yet.
No, this isn't the best years of the presidency, honestly. John Tyler establishes the vice presidential transition, which is an important staple of the office. So he's not a failure. He also completed his term, which was almost a full term, thanks to Harrison dying a month in. But
you're not supposed to laugh at someone's death, but like, you know, this one's especially silly.
John Tyler expanded the U.S. Navy, which I guess, if you're into that, is good. But he was very against the bank, which was the whole reason the country elected the Whigs, because they were like, we're tired of living off of these bizarre treasury schemes the government thinks up. We want banks, we want liquidity, we want to expand. And William Henry Harrison, they elected to do it. And John Tyler took his place and then just like completely threw his agenda in the garbage can and didn't do anything. Just he vetoed everything his party tried to do. So he just screwed up the entire presidency, and he kind of subverted the democratic will, in my opinion, and became a very dictatorial president in some ways, and was delusional about like getting reelected. He didn't even get renominated. His party chucked him out. And he left ignominiously. Everyone in the country hated him. And then he joined the Confederacy during the Civil War and died.
Good.
Yeah. So there's John Tyler.
But then, but after John Tyler, now here's a really interesting guy, James K. Polk.
S.
Really?
Absolutely. S
now,
tier.
why to you is James K. Polk little talked about, little thought of James K. Polk on your S tier ranking?
And only a one-termer.
He only needed one term.
He only needed one term.
James K. Polk set the golden standard for a president who makes a plan, effects the plan successfully, leaves, and dies of shitting himself.
Well, there's worse ways to go, maybe.
3 months later. Yeah, you know, like ability to get off the stage is a huge factor in this. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes you get off the stage too early, you get an F.
Yeah.
Right?
Sometimes you can't even
shit yourself to death.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Right. The amount of land that James K. Polk added to the United States is astounding. I mean, people say he didn't get all the land he promised to get, but he got most of the land he promised to get. And he sent settlers flying in that direction. Now, mind you, that's terrible for the Native American people that were living there. There's no president that's going to be good, but we're talking about presidents who effectively did the job. The guy was a workaholic. He worked himself to death, basically, and that's why he died as soon as he left the presidency. He was very impersonable. He had a terrible personality. People didn't like him, and it just didn't matter. He was able to achieve what he wanted to achieve. He didn't build a bank, but he built an independent treasury, which was at least something that could help the country along, even though it wasn't perfect. And it ended up getting scrapped later by Woodrow Wilson. He also added the Oregon Territory without going to war with England. And he beat the Mexicans in the Mexican-American War. And he just has so many accomplishments. There's like no president that has so many dramatic accomplishments, I think, as James K. Polk. He just did so much in 4 years.
So why do I feel like he never gets talked about?
Well, for one, he's not admirable. He's a slave-holding, and he's buying and selling slaves from the White House. And like his wife is like awesome in some ways, but also like, the white people should be indoors and the black people should be outdoors. Like that was her attitude. So they're not great people, and they're not fun or interesting, and they were Polk was is a lot of people think he was a terrible president actually, and I don't actually disagree in some ways, but I still think he's an S tier because he's just such a dramatic presidency and so much achieved.
Now we go from someone who has a real full 4 years to
Mm-hmm.
someone who doesn't even isn't even able to complete half of that amount of time. Zachary Taylor, a nice F for 16-month term.
Brutal.
Zachary Taylor.
I can't stand Zachary Taylor. Actually,
Not
I mean,
even
I
worth.
I like him as a guy, but I just think he's maybe the worst president of all.
I don't even
Give us.
recognize this dude. I've never seen this person before.
They convinced him to be president, right? He wasn't even trying to be president. The Whig Party was like, "Hey, you, this would be. We really need you to come out. You're salt of the earth. You're a general. It would really be good for the country and good for us if you could be president." And then he doesn't do a heck of a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, from everything I've read about Zachary Taylor, I never got a sense that he really mastered the reins of the presidency or that he wasn't really even an active or deeply thinking person. He, yeah, he also brought a lot of slaveholding people into his administration, and they went kind of wild and did a lot of things behind his back. And then he got pissed off at them. And so a lot of people like Taylor because they think he took a stand against slavery, but really he didn't take a stand against slavery. He took a stand against like these people who were associated with slavery that he was in rivalry with. Like one of them was Jefferson Davis, actually, who was in his cabinet. So that's also another fucking minus if you put Jefferson Davis in your cabinet. Um, and he threatened to hang him at one point. Like Jefferson Davis was like undermining U.S. sovereignty in the South the whole time, and Taylor basically held up what we would call maybe something like an omnibus bill uh, over slavery. He took a kind of an anti-slavery stand, which kind of seems cool. But all he did was just inflame the country, and then he just died. And Millard Fillmore just fixed everything that was going wrong in like 5 seconds, and the country went back to normal for 10 more years.
So that segues us right into the next guy, Millard Fillmore. Where are you putting him?
I'm gonna put him on I'll give him an A. I'll put him an A.
Is
Our
this him?
first A.
Yeah,
Yes.
Millard Fillmore. He's an A.
I like his bow tie.
Yeah.
Well, he's the guy that looks like the starring actor in a film called Rust that we may or may not get to see in the future.
Probably not.
Thanks for that comment.
Sorry, you can cut that out.
The like Alec Baldwin shot someone comment. Okay. All right. So Millard Fillmore, I think Conor can speak to why because both of us agree on Millard Fillmore.
I think Millard Fillmore kind of in some ways reset the presidency. There's a lot of people, there's like a lot going on in that there were people, going trying to get land. There were wars constantly happening. There was a couple of quick deaths in a row of president, or not in a row, but recent presidents. There wasn't a heck of a lot of people staying around. I could have put that better, but anyway, the point is that Millard was not trying to grow the country. He was not trying to get us involved too much in foreign affairs, though I do believe he was like talking more with Japan and such. But he, during a time of turmoil between the North and the South, did really the best that he could of keeping the country together and not making too many problems in the North, not making too many problems in the South. And the biggest problem with him is for sure the Fugitive Slave Act. But that was kind of already taking place in America at the time. So he put something into law, which is terrible, but was already happening, and that's really the biggest knock on him. He was someone who was like able to. He was the king of Buffalo, and he came in, and I don't know. I thought he was able to settle the presidency before, obviously, bad stuff is happening soon. but he gave the country more time and gave the an attempt to bring the two sides together.
I think that Millard Fillmore really saved the country from a civil war. He wasn't able to prevent the Civil War. There was going to be a civil war, but he actually kind of bought the North a little bit of time to advance and get their stuff together, even though they weren't prepared for the second Civil War. But like, I don't know if 1850 was the right year to have it out. And I think Millard Fillmore, there's a scale of how much a president is to blame. I think of it this way: any president would sign a Fugitive Slave Act if the conditions were right. The question is like, how much is Millard Fillmore personally responsible? He wasn't like rabidly advocating for a Fugitive Slave Act. He went, all right, if this will quiet you down, I'll sign it. And that's not admirable, but in that situation, I don't really see like what president, unless they were actively trying to just break up the country, wouldn't have acquiesced on that and wouldn't have just said, okay, fine. And so he managed to keep the country together. He kept the United States out of Europe on several occasions, and there were many inflamed revolutionary events going on in Europe, and people were trying to get the United States to send money and weapons, and he refused. Instead, he sent the Navy eastward and actually opened up Japan, which is pretty cool. So he began helping the United States look Pacificward more and stop obsessing with Europe all the time, even though World War II and World War I were coming. But still, that's why I like Millard Fillmore.
Cool guy, definitely deserving of our first A-tier president. But after Millard Fillmore, we get arguably America's prettiest president, Franklin Pierce.
Franklin Pierce is handsome. Jerry
The
curl.
prettiest one.
Yeah, that's yeah. There he is.
All right, where does he go?
Franklin Pierce. Yeah, Franklin Pierce. Oh my goodness. You know where Franklin's going.
Does it start with the same? Is it an F? All right.
Franklin Pierce.
Now, why
filling up on this F tier?
Terrible president. Most of the terrible presidents are in this period. Honestly, they get better as after the Civil War.
That's his hard to believe.
Yeah,
his son does die early on, so there's a little bit of an excuse that like why he wasn't really there and active and a good president. But
yeah.
The tier list is how good of a president are you, and he was not.
His son died like violently and tragically in front of him on their way to Washington, D.C. when their train crashed. And that was the last child they had left. Two others had died, and that's how he started his presidency. He was already kind of a gloomy character. He was really close friends with Nathaniel Hawthorne. He had fought in the Mexican-American War. And so on that strength, as a kind of a political outsider, he was sort of thrust into the Democratic nomination. He ran against Winfield Scott, who was the competing general to Zachary Taylor. When Zachary Taylor ran for president, they wanted Taylor because he was more normal than Winfield Scott, who was just an idiot and a windbag. And I'm not an idiot, but a windbag. And he lost miserably to, like, this guy crushed in the election. He got tons of votes. But that's where his mastery ends. After that, everything just went downhill. He did a lot of really weird interventionist stuff. Like, he recognized this American government in Nicaragua. These like dudes went down to Nicaragua and just like took over the country and like applied for recognition, and he recognized them, and then they got massacred. Like the Nicaraguan army came in 3 months later and destroyed them. So what an embarrassment to recognize that. So he's a little bit of kind of a Putin streak in him that way. And he also he signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which caused the mini civil war in Kansas. And that was a really dumb idea. That was a bad idea. But he was just so desperate to sign something and get a victory that he signed a really badly made law that left the floor open for sectarian violence between abolitionists and Southerners, pro-slavery Southerners, and it was terrible. Well, it was bloody.
Speaking of both bad presidents and bloody conflicts. The next guy is James Buchanan. And where, pray tell, does he go?
I mean, obviously F tier as well.
Jesus Christ.
They for sure deserves it. He might be
There's
the worst president.
there's going to be a lot less F tiers once we get past the
No,
Civil War.
I thought this was the worst president.
No,
Well,
John
I thought
Tyler
this
was.
was the worst president.
I mean, you could maybe argue that Buchanan gets a D because he did have a successful administration somewhat in the middle of it. It wasn't until the very end when it got really crappy. But when you end your administration with fewer states than you had when you started it, and you're the only one, that's an F tier.
And he was, heavy Southern leaning. That certainly did not help the effort at all. It was the whole reason why Abraham Lincoln knew that he was coming into a situation where it was basically there was going to be a civil war within not a long time. I mean, he was not a good. When you think of a president, you're someone presiding over the United States of America, and very little was united through James Buchanan.
Yeah, he was a polarizing figure for both sides, and he contributed the fact that people didn't recognize him as like a legitimate leader, that further compromised the unity of the United States at a critical moment and was part of the reason the split happened when it did. So F. All right.
So based on that, the next guy's an F2, right?
S. S. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham S. Lincoln.
Now, Johnny, obviously you don't know a lot about Abraham Lincoln, so let Langdon, who is wearing a really great Abraham.
I'm the expert. I know that he's a vampire hunter, which is obviously a good thing.
He's also a werewolf, which we established at President Lincoln's cottage with well-sourced quotes.
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln stepped into the presidency imagine if you got a really great job. Let's say you got to be the CEO of Twitter, and you walked into the Twitter offices, and Elon Musk had left the place with 4 programmers. All the computers were broken. There was a fire, like just some fire someplace in the building, and like that's what you walked into, and you had to like basically from nothing, from the ruins that he left, revive Twitter and make it back to a normal functioning website. That's what Abraham Lincoln had to do to the country, basically, and he did.
What a colorful and timely metaphor.
I don't even want to say more about Abraham Lincoln because that's just why he's
I don't know what else you could say.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to certainly the next S tier president, Andrew Johnson.
This guy, right?
Yeah, Andrew Johnson gets a D.
The guy with the silly hair.
He's a D.
There's a lot of dudes with silly hair in here.
That's kind. D is kind. Why is he a D president for you, Johnny?
Well, he did Reconstruction in a really terrible way, but he did do some reconstructing, and he did some level of it couldn't have been easy taking the presidency off Abraham Lincoln's hands. He was bad at it. He was a doofus. He was a racist, but
certainly didn't help the country come together. It certainly didn't help the newly freed slaves.
He didn't even have a vice president.
And he vetoed a lot of things. So he was an obstinate president who did not work with Congress very well. But I think he's at least a little bit more active and gets some interesting things on the Alaska Purchase. I mean, he's still got Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State, the legendary William Seward. So there's some interesting foreign policy stuff going on under Johnson. It's not all a waste, but it's mostly he really F's up the end of Lincoln's presidency. So D.
Well, thankfully, after Andrew Johnson, we get someone quite a bit better, General Ulysses S. Grant.
Yeah, Ulysses S. Grant's a C.
Okay.
A little
Okay,
better.
I feel like C's are usually bad dudes with a couple redeeming qualities.
Ulysses Grant is a good dude who is in over his head.
Mm. How so?
He is a very so he's a great general, and one of his strengths is that he can win friends very easily. In war, you tend to, even though you're seeing people's faces get blown off every 5 seconds, it's a space where like honor is very valued and keeping true to your word. And so scamming is not something you grow a thick skin or radar for. And so when he took the transition from military to politics, he was a little gullible and he was easily talked into stupid things and scams. And he had a lot of economic scandals and like Bernie Madoff kind of shit happening
Oh, sick.
around him. So probably some of the craziest economic scandals. Like that would make him a D, except that he brought back Abraham Lincoln's fight for equality for the newly freed people, and he persecuted the KKK, and so that gives him a little boost.
Okay.
Was that popular? Because we've talked about like not judging people based on how well they did in their time. Were people anti KKK right after the Civil War, or were there a lot of people who were very pro KKK?
There was no KKK until after the Civil War. It was Confederate veterans who put it together, and they started to terrorize the Northerners, the newly freed people, other foreigners who supported abolition. And so the question was, can the federal government send in the military to the states and force like them to police a rogue group like the KKK? And he passed a law that essentially set the standard for like hate crime laws and things like that, where it's like
Yeah,
the government is allowed to go in and stop hate, like that racist hate. So that's important precedent, I think.
yeah, I would say.
And after him, after Grant comes Rutherford B. Hayes in the end of Reconstruction. Where are we sticking him?
Rutherford B. Hayes is a guy who I love and want to make a B tier, but he's unfortunately if James Monroe got to be a B tier, I'm gonna make Rutherford B. Hayes B tier as well.
Okay. Now, why is he in the B tier? What do you really what do you like about Rutherford B. Hayes?
Unfortunately, his administration was mostly, I wouldn't call it a failure, but a stagnant. He had a Brezhnev factor thing going on where it was like the country didn't really advance under him. He also got almost nothing done because he was elected in a dubious manner. But unlike John Quincy Adams, he really had nothing to do with the dubious way he got elected. Like he was literally sitting in Ohio being like, you tell me, am I president or not? And they were like, wait, wait. And then 3 days before he became president, they're like, yep, you became the president. It was a backroom deal, but somebody had to step in and do it. And he was like, all right, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. So that set off the tone for his presidency in a bad way. But he battled against a lot of the negative forces in the Republican Party that were associated with Grant, the scammers and stuff, and he advanced the agenda for civil service reform, which would be a solution to the spoils system that Andrew Jackson had started and was still going in a lot of ways, even since Lincoln. So he was going to like create a civil service to fix all of that. Unfortunately, because people didn't take him very seriously because of the way he was elected, he didn't get a lot done. And so he really should be a C tier, but I'm looking at a lot of these presidents coming up and I'm like, all right, I don't want to fill the C tier. So we're gonna make him B.
All
Rutherford
right.
B.
Well,
Hayes.
Yeah.
after
So
Mm-hmm.
then we
you go,
have
Langdon.
James A. Garfield.
James A. Garfield, unfortunately, is gonna have to be a C because he died too early to do anything, and what
Yeah.
he did so far was fine, but it did not necessarily speak that he was gonna nail being president. I mean, his presidency started out with a pretty rough scandal, not scandal, but a pretty rough battle between this like dick swinging Republican senator named Roscoe Conkling, who he managed to he bested him, and then he got murdered. So, and he was also a very exceptionally talented and thoughtful guy who probably would have been a great president had he lived, but he just died too early to give him more than a C, I think.
Did he continue the Brezhnev factor, or do we not break that till this next president?
He was president 9 months. The Brezhnev factor is the Gilded Age, in my opinion, and that's going to go until like the 1890s. So, yeah. All right.
So after we have the lasagna cat,
Yeah.
we have Chester A. Arthur.
Chester
The
A.
reading aardvark.
Yep. It's he's see George Bush, Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, so I'm gonna make him an A tier president.
Ooh.
Wow.
Shock a lot of people. Simple reason that he was probably the last person who ever thought he would be president, and he was the last person anyone ever thought would be president. James Garfield was extremely popular, and when he died, everyone was freaking devastated, and then he had to take over, and nobody respected this guy. But he managed to actually do the job with dignity, and he won a lot of people's respect. He passed the Civil Service Act that Rutherford B. Hayes failed to get passed, which majorly made the civil service a more meritocratic based system, and that really opened the door for a lot of people of color to actually participate in the civil service, and Black people in particular are highly employed in government work to this day. So Chester Arthur is a big reason for that. He also signed the Chinese Exclusion Act after he tried. He tried not to. He didn't want to. He wasn't carnival barking about the threat of immigrants. In fact, he said, "I'm signing this even though this is a dumb idea." But he signed it. So, he's not going to be an S tier for that. But
well, after we have a president finishing someone's term, we have a president with two different terms, both the 22nd and the 24th president, Grover Cleveland. Where are we sticking someone who was good enough to get elected a second time, but not good enough to be elected 8 years in a row?
Actually, he won the popular vote all 3 times. So I'll give him an A.
Ooh.
Tell us about Grover. Was he Super Grover?
Grover was he was elected as a bachelor. He was the governor of New York. He's the only president that we know personally hanged people.
Okay.
Well, maybe Andrew Jackson, we know he hanged people, but we know that he hanged people as an executioner in official capacity for the state of New York.
Yes, I forgot about that.
Is that on the career path to president?
Could be. I rank Grover Cleveland high because he's kind of a phenomenon. He's the first Democratic president since James Buchanan, and the first successful Democratic president since, I guess, James K. Polk.
Oh, he was against high tariffs, imperialism, subsidies, according to Wikipedia.
Yeah, that's the other thing about him. He's unique among presidents in terms of he's not obsessed with like the white man's burden and with the United States carrying its mission everywhere. He is very anti-war, and he only has a few scuffles with like Germany over Venezuela and stuff like that, but mostly compared to other presidents, he doesn't intervene in Latin American affairs as much. So I think he had some problems in terms of getting a lot of power, and at a certain point JP Morgan sort of took over and was like, I'm going to run the economy now, because the economy got so bad during his second term. So second administration, I would maybe give a C, but his first was pretty good. So we'll give him an A.
Do you think if he only had the one term, he'd be an S?
Maybe not. Maybe not, because he was interrupted. Like Polk had one term, but he was finished.
Yeah.
In between him being the 22nd and 24th president, we have President William McKinley, excuse me.
No,
No.
no, we
What
have
am I doing?
President
Benjamin
Santa
Harrison.
Claus.
That's
Oh
Benjamin
my God.
Harrison.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Let's just do that again. um, in between Grover 1 and Grover 2, we have Benjamin Harrison.
Yeah, you can give him a C.
Oh, C tier almost full.
He began national parks, which is pretty cool.
That is, yep, I like that.
He just wasn't that powerful of a president, but he, I mean, things happened, I guess, under his watch. He just didn't do that much, but he did more than people think. So it's just tough to rank Benjamin Harrison for me because I don't know a lot about him. And the little bit I do know is sort of like, yeah, that's fine. There's nothing offensive about that. So see.
Well, then right on to the 25th president, William McKinley.
William McKinley, I'm going to have to give a B.
Okay.
All right.
Because he actually made an honest effort to hold the United States back from jumping into the Spanish-American War, and he was actually very cautious of imperialism, but his caution went to the wind after a certain period. After a certain number of years, he ended up becoming controlled, I feel, by the imperialists, and he launched the Mexican-American War, which was a success, but then it was also followed by a failed war in the Philippines. That was his bequest to Teddy Roosevelt and William Howard Taft. But he was a very effective, strong president. He had some pretty good monetary policy. And I think that overall he had a pretty interesting plan for the country, but he's also what they base the Wizard of Oz on. So not really, but they say that.
Now, after McKinley comes someone who's become kind of the figure that a lot of people look to today. I mean, obviously there's other presidents, but Theodore Roosevelt is one of the biggest personalities and one of the grandest presidents we ever could have had.
That was an S. S tier.
I mean, that's the president that you look at and read about when you're getting into presidents, right? I mean, I believe you told me that you got into presidents reading Theodore Roosevelt because he lived the life of what, like 10 men or whatever the expression was. I don't remember. What was that weird?
No, that's just an incredible praise to say to someone. He was more important than 10 men put together.
It wasn't that he was more important. He was just, he did so many things, and it was because he was kind of not allowed out of the house as a kid. Well, not because, but generally.
Oh, like the Michael Jackson thing.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. The reason why Theodore Roosevelt is S tier is because he's the Michael Jackson of presidents. Moving on. William Howard Taft.
All right. Yeah, I mean, people know a lot about Roosevelt. It's fine. William Howard Taft, I'm gonna put him.
Yeah, Google it.
Yeah. I'll give William Howard Taft a D because he's a decent guy, but he doesn't really get a whole lot done during his administration. He's not actually doesn't really enjoy the job of presidency very much. And so he's actually relieved when the 4 years are up. I wish I knew more about the Taft administration, but I unfortunately don't. And I feel like the next president that we're going to be reviewing, I know a lot of people hate Woodrow Wilson. I'm sorry that you all hate Woodrow Wilson, but he was a very far-thinking figure in American politics.
It's him, right?
Yeah, and he's a major president. So put him up on S up there.
Oh wow! Whoa. So for those of you who don't know, I'm me to say this. Maybe I can't say this. You can cut it out. For those of you who don't know, Johnny used to work at Woodrow Wilson's house in D.C., so they know quite a bit about Wilson. What is your you used to complain, talk about how much of not complain, but you used to bring home stories about how he was certainly not the best guy and not the best president. What makes you say that he's an S tier?
I almost want to give him an A because he kind of crashed landed at the end.
Sure.
But I just think that the entire modern presidency, like the presidency, it's another one of those situations where the presidency was really due for an update, and Woodrow Wilson gave it that and then some.
Yeah.
He was like a superstar president, and like unlike Teddy Roosevelt, who rode all these horses and shot all these rhinos, he was just a university professor. Like he wasn't anything adventurous, but he managed to become he managed to eclipse Theodore Roosevelt in the world stage. I mean, he's the first world president, the first American president for the world. And he completely modernizes the presidency in a way that just like the levers of control that the presidency has. Like he basically he makes the presidency such a much more serious position, and that is becomes evident when his successor takes power, Warren Harding, and he's such a low card, such a nothing. He's
Now, why don't you tell us about everybody's favorite Muppet?
He was just okay. Lower.
Lower.
The lowest.
Yeah, no, he's a
really
failure.
That down.
He's a failure,
he's
unfortunately.
We need a G tier.
He's just a failed president. Like he had some charm and he had some interesting things about him. He let Eugene Debs out of jail, so he scaled back a lot of the things that Woodrow Wilson did that were bad. He also gave a pro civil rights speech in Alabama, which, considering the time, is pretty cool. But other than that, he had no control over his administration. He was mostly just a pretty face for the cameras, and all this like insanity and double dealing was going on behind his back, and people were greasing his palms and paying each other off, and there was bribes and crime in the White House, and he just really lowered from what Woodrow Wilson had raised the presidency to. He like lowered the profile completely, and I think maybe he even was not physically strong enough to finish the presidency, and may have died because his like heart gave out because he was just like, I'm not up to this. So I consider him, actually his death, I'm willing to even say, is part of the reason why he's a failure, because I feel like he died because he couldn't hack it.
Oof.
I'm sorry to the people at Warren G. Harding Memorial Center in Marion, Ohio, but that's just how I feel about it. Yeah.
So how do we feel then about his successor, Calvin Coolidge, who dies in office? Yes.
No. Calvin Coolidge finished his term and then he died shortly after. But Calvin Coolidge can go right next to William McKinley, I think, as a B tier.
Okay.
I don't like his governing philosophy so much. That's a big reason why people love Calvin Coolidge, because he was like what Reagan said he was. Calvin Coolidge was actually that, and even more than Reagan. He was like business, America's business. He wanted loose regulations, free market economy, and there was no safety handles by the end of his administration really left to keep the country afloat, and it crashed under the next president. But I think what was cool about Calvin Coolidge is that he was able to say no to people, which was something that the presidency had lost. The sense of like the president is a tightwad that doesn't say yes to anyone unless it's a really good idea. That they, nowadays the president is called the first customer, and I don't think people thought of Calvin Coolidge as the first customer. He was a tough nut to crack, and I think that's pretty cool. So,
okay, well, after him, we have what I assume, I could be wrong, but what I assume to be the last worst president that we have on the upcoming list, Herbert Hoover.
Yeah, Herbert Hoover is going to be a D.
Ooh.
Oh, really? Not an F?
No, no, he was an effective operator politically and a really smart and interesting guy, a forward-thinking guy. I think he's another one that he's a great American, but he's not a great president. And I
Well,
think
he
the big
certainly didn't help during the Great Depression.
no, but that happened like right at the end, right? Or did it happen right? No, it happened right at the beginning of his presidency.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, like he came in hot with like a chicken in every pot, bread on every table, and then the depression immediately hit. And he just couldn't like say he couldn't say the right thing, do the right thing. And he just wasn't able to really handle the way the economy felt. I think he came in with big plans and he didn't realize that he was going to have to be a cleanup crew president. I think he
sure.
thought he was going to be a good economy, do some stuff, etch my name in the wall, get accomplishments, retire, and it ended up he had to be cleanup crew, and that was not his skill set. So he failed. Where FDR was able to swoop in, S tier baby, get him up there.
Wait, what's
FDR, the
what's what's Hoover's saving grace? What keeps him
Um,
from out of the Fs?
he did a lot of the same policies that FDR did. He was progressive. He was smart. He was actually could have been a good president in a different time. He
Yeah.
just didn't handle the time he got well. Yeah, so FDR S tier. He's served 3 terms, got elected to 4. He saw the country through the Depression. He again another president who walked into a presidency that was out of date and brought it back up to speed and made the president a recognizable figure and a figure of authority in the country again. So that's a huge
also
win
the
for the
first
presidency.
president, also the first president to speak directly with the people. The fireside chats were so important and integral in the country feeling together during, I mean, the Great Depression, during World War II, during the aftermath, and trying to figure out how America moves forward. That was a really powerful. I mean, it's propaganda, but it was still a really powerful way of moving forward as president and bringing the president to the modern age.
Yeah, it was a truly advanced administration with a lot of interesting thinkers. They did a lot of stupid stuff too, but at least they were trying things. And he beat, he was part of the coalition that beat Hitler and Japanese Empire. So S tier.
Well, speaking of stupid stuff, we have Harry S. Truman coming up, who did one of the maybe it wasn't dumb at the time, but looking back, looks like one of the hardest, dumbest decisions to do as president.
A. And what dumbest decision is that?
I would just say that the atom bomb was
That was not the dumbest presidential decision. That might be an inhumane decision, but that was the smartest presidential decision. Like in terms of him
okay.
surviving his presidency, that was like major because he got us out of the war with that.
Sure. He also didn't know what he was doing. Didn't know that that was. He comes into the presidency with it all being done, and then coming up to him being like, "We can end everything right now if you do this."
Right. He's just he is a very effective presider over the military industrial complex that Franklin Delano Roosevelt creates. He expands it, which I don't support now, but at the time it might have seemed like a wiser thing to do. He did get us into an ill-fated conflict with Korea, which was not good.
Sure.
But he continued the New Deal. So he strengthened the social safety nets of the country. He was a interesting and kind of funny guy. He was just like a nobody congressman who got kind of like accidentally swooped up into the vice presidency in 1944 and then met FDR and was like, oh God, this guy's gonna die in like 5 seconds. And he did. And then Truman was like, oh shit, I'm the president. And they were like, yeah, and you have an atom bomb. Um, so for a guy that like went from that to where he ended up, he actually could go toe to toe with Stalin pretty well as well, which I give him a lot of credit for as well. So we'll
Would
give him an
would you
A.
say that would you say that Harry Truman is was probably the best president to follow up a great president? Has had anyone else followed up such a personality or such a time with as much power and with, or at least with as much like controlling and gaining the reins on his own as he did.
I guess we'll have to find out who's next.
Well, after him, we got Dwight the Eisenhower.
Dwight D.
I like Ike.
Eisenhower. Okay.
Come on, you gotta like Ike.
Oh yeah, he's an A.
Nice.
Why?
Because unlike Zachary Taylor, he was able to make the transition from military, in which he was hugely successful. Zachary Taylor beat Mexico. Dwight D. Eisenhower was part of the coalition that beat Nazi Germany and won the Second World War. And he was, whatever you think of NATO now, he created the military. He helped to build, maybe not create, but helped to build a lot of the military alliances that solidified the post-World War II order. He built the highway system in the United States, so he had some progressive credentials. He sent the military into southern states that would not allow Black students to go into the school. So he set that precedent, which Kennedy picked up. So he gets an A.
I think one of the things that he did, what was like, he was either in his final days in office or it was right after he was in office, where he warns America of, well, what we shortly become, which is a military power poking our nose in everyone's business.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
after Eisenhower, we have, I mean, a big time guy, big time personality. I would argue second prettiest president.
That's
nope.
Obama.
We have JFK.
JFK. Let's give him an A as well.
I respect that you didn't put him on S tier.
Just a magical president. He saved,
magical.
Yeah, he was very thoughtful, and he was just a guy that was getting better and better at the job the more he did it. I don't necessarily agree with his views and with his like anti-communism, but he was more practical than a lot of presidents, and he really showed that he was learning the ropes as he went on. Even though he made a lot of big mistakes like the bag of pigs at the beginning, he was getting the hang of it. And you got to give him a curve because he's taken over the presidency as the first World War II generation president, at a time when the United States was the world leader, and he filled the shoes very well. He captured the nation. He raised the prestige of the office to heights never before seen. He was kind of the perfect guy for the job at the time, and his death made him a legend. So I guess
you talk about presidents like Hoover who like aren't the right president for the time. How often does it line up so perfectly where you have someone like JFK who is the right president for the time?
It's like the moon, all the planets lining up.
So he's real good.
Yeah, he's good.
What keeps him out of the S tier?
Oh, I mean, he didn't do as much accomplishment wise as like Lincoln or any of the people out there.
He's on a bit of a time crunch,
He had a time crunch, and you could argue that a lot of his stuff got passed because of the next president, Lyndon Johnson, who I'm going to give a B, because he passed a lot of JFK stuff, and he passed civil rights, but Vietnam was at least, a B, and his approach to the Great Society approach to the war on poverty, that kind of thing, it's a great idea, but it was poorly executed, and it basically set the groundwork for the Republicans to take over and like cut, and ultimately like the Reagan years. So I think like it's great that he did a war on poverty, but I don't think he did a good job with it. So B.
Next. So after LBJ, we have a real contentious character, someone who was very progressive in many ways, and also in many ways very anti-progressive, bringing the country back, especially with his drug laws. How do you feel about Richard Milhous Nixon?
C. Because he dropped the ball at the end, he has to at least be a C. But he was really good on foreign policy, other than how he bombed the shit out of Cambodia. But he was, I mean, like we're in the years where the presidents are all war criminals now, and I have to have an even spread. I'm sorry, folks, you're just gonna have to deal with it. So yeah, he was just very. He was probably one of the smartest presidents, but he was also very Machiavellian, and I think he was too obsessed with the inside baseball of his administration and Congress, and he was neglecting his responsibility to be the people's president, and so he got very like paranoid and manipulative, and he ended up sowing the seeds of his own destruction. So a very Shakespearean figure, but C tier president.
Then we have a president that fills in right after the impeachment. Gerald Ford died today.
Yeah,
where are we putting Gerald Ford?
Gerald Ford is going to be a B.
This is the third president with a big honker.
Gerald Ford is able to take the reins from Richard Nixon at a time that is really bad for America and bad for trust in government. And he manages to restore a lot of that trust in government. He has a failed whip inflation now program. He has some good relations with Russia, and he gets along with Brezhnev really well and signs a really important treaty with Brezhnev to control weapons and to better communication between the United States and Russia. And he survives 2 assassination attempts. He was just a congressman whose lifelong dream was to be the Speaker of the House, and he became president in the worst way possible, like after the resignation of a criminal president who he had to pardon, basically. Mm-hmm. So that sucked, and it's not clear whether they had a deal. He said Gerald Ford said they didn't have a deal. I'm inclined to believe Gerald Ford. I just think that Gerald Ford knew that he had to pardon Richard Nixon, or it would never end. And his administration would be dominated by Richard Nixon, and he was just kind of like an honorable guy in that way. But I think Gerald Ford did an effective job, and
you think he did a better job than Nixon in at least tier wise?
Maybe equal, but Nixon dropped the ball, and he was also crazy. Yeah.
Well, after we have another president where I'm not 100% sure where you're going to put him. We've had many conversations about him. The peanut farmer himself, Jimmy Carter.
I guess I would put Jimmy Carter as a C tier president as well.
Now, what if I told you that he saw a spaceship, was president, and still says that he saw a spaceship? Does that move him up or down?
That could help him greatly. But unfortunately, Jimmy Carter was he got a lot done, and people don't realize that. He raised the power of the presidency. He also raised the temperature of the Cold War. He armed a lot of shady characters, including Osama bin Laden during his administration. And he boycotted the Moscow Olympics for some stupid reason. He was sanctimonious, rigid, but he was able to get a lot of things done. He also increased diversity in the presidential administration and government. He had the most diverse administration ever. And he brought just like a general spirit of more liberal attitudes, which, sorry to my conservative viewers, but like I like when the things loosen up a little bit more than when it's like tight. But so I give Jimmy Carter credit for that. He botched Iran, but he also is the reason that the people eventually did go home from the Iran embassy. So he was a very dedicated, devoted president. He just wasn't a very effective one.
Well, speaking about effective, we got the Gipper,
Ronald Reagan.
Where are we putting him?
Ooh. I would put Ronald Reagan at... I'm going to have to give him maybe a D.
Wow.
Yeah.
You just insulted your conservative viewers, and now the biggest insult to them.
I love Ronald Reagan.
For Ronald Reagan.
No, I love Ronald Reagan, like his personality. I think he was... See, I could maybe give him like the JFK bump for being like a very charismatic president, but I think his presidency is more fondly remembered in retrospect than it was experienced, to be honest. I think that in the 80s, he really gutted the government and fetishized the idea that the government shouldn't have any power, and gutted a lot of what FDR had spent so much trying to build. And it was all in the name of, like, he's another one of these presidents who maybe could have modernized the country, but I feel that Reagan actually kind of set the country backward and sort of left us with the beginnings of the death of industry, the death of worker union
Trickle down
power.
economics. You telling me that doesn't work? You telling me giving millionaires more money doesn't give me more money?
No, I mean, it's just, I think he was charismatic, and then through that charisma, he did his deals. And I also think that he was too hawkish on the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union did not need to crash. It could have been maybe reformed and with the United States help, but he pushed it into a collapse, and we're still dealing with the results of that today with Putin. So unfortunately, I think Ronald Reagan, I think he's over lionized because we haven't had that many good presidents recently, and people are looking for ones to look to that seemed like they were good presidents. And Reagan comes across as a good president, and he was very charming, and I think he was out of it for like 3 or 4 years. He was kind of mentally out of it. So and El Salvador, like, nah, I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of his policies and his administration, even though I'm obsessed with Reagan as a person. So yeah.
Well, after Reagan, we get his vice president. How do we feel about George Bush Sr., HW?
All right, I want to make sure these come out even. So
I'm keeping count. I'll warn you.
Okay, I'll give George Bush an A.
Wow,
pretty good.
Yeah,
even with all of his problems in the Middle East, and
he didn't have a problem. He solved his problems in the Middle East. He beat my man.
Well, all right.
In 3 months.
Okay. His son definitely wasn't out to avenge all the problems his dad had gone through.
Well, that's his son, and we'll talk about him when we get to his son. But George H.W. Bush was a very effective president, diplomatic, multilateral in his approach to foreign relations, a genius in many ways. He was
points of light.
When the Berlin Wall fell, he refused to gloat about it, which was a huge deal for the U.S. having decent relations with Russia for a little while. So I would give him an A. I think he was very effective.
But we do have the invasion of Panama, the Gulf War, NAFTA.
But first of all, NAFTA, he negotiated a lot of it, but that was signed by Clinton. The Panama attack was successful. They got rid of Noriega, and like if you're going to talk about, like, all these guys did coups, George Bush did like effective ones that worked a lot of times. I mean, they're still ugly and terrible. If you want to go to the details, I'll tell you what I don't like about all of them. But I just think George Bush, that was an effective attack. And then the Gulf War was effective. It was over in like 3 months. And the only reason George Bush didn't get reelected is the economy got worse, and because there was a third-party candidate in the race who spoiled it, Ross Perot.
Well, now we're left with presidents that are still amongst the living. How much time do we have?
Also, George Bush is the only president who brought crack into the Oval Office.
What are you talking about?
He gave a speech about an anti-drug speech, and he pulled out a bag, and he's like, "You see this? This is crack cocaine." And it was sold in Lafayette Park in front of the White House. Yeah.
I bought it.
I bought it. I went, like, he put on like a sweatsuit and like, yeah.
How are we doing on time?
We got time for one more, and then we got to break and come back.
No, it says we have 6 minutes.
We can do them all?
Yeah, we can get them done.
Let's do them.
Let's do them. We got, I mean, big star big Burger King guy, Bill Clinton. Actually, he might be a McDonald's guy. It doesn't matter. We have Bill
D
Clinton, the
D
42nd president.
D D
D.
D.
Wow. Wow.
D.
I consider Bill Clinton to be a president who swept America off its feet and then left it and didn't call it in the morning.
Mm.
Like
Sounds like something he'd do.
he swept America off its feet, and he was loved by the liberals and the elites of the country, but he was a very conservative president. He was basically like all the
Yes.
liberals, all the rich liberals want the Republican policies, but they can't say they want the Republican policies because then they'll look like evil people. So what they need is someone like Bill Clinton who looks like he's a good guy because he's a Democrat to do Republican things in the name of Democrats so they can get what they want and still look virtuous, I think. So Bill Clinton just provided that service, I felt, where he
Bill Clinton and I have a personal relationship. He used to run down my street when I was growing up. I'd see the Secret Service. I'd see Bill. He would walk his dog around my school, around my library, and you're bad mouthing my boy. All right, I can't even listen to it anymore. We got to go on to the next guy.
well
We got to.
the blowjob too. Come on, I mean he turned the whole presidency into a joke. So
Oh.
Well,
Oh.
speaking about jokes, George W.
I
If you're
honestly
giving
think George
Clinton a
W is
D,
an F. I think George W is an F.
I
Ooh.
agree, fully agree.
F.
Yeah,
He's for real
Just
one of the worst
even
presidents we've ever
even
had.
being the 9/11 president, he's an F.
He's
everything everything I
garbage.
could say good about George W. Bush, it's because he was president during 9/11, and like that's not something that, as far as I know, was his fault that he was president during 9/11. But like it's like, oh, but he was the 9/11 president and he gave great speeches and he threw the baseball really well. But that's where it ends. It ends after that. It just becomes a nightmare after that. Everything the first 9 months of his presidency are he's a nobody, he's a zero, he didn't win. Fuck this guy. 9/11, he's the most popular president of all time. And then his popularity just goes the whole time. And
Yeah.
he doesn't seem to get the point until at the very end he actually started to get the hang of being president, and maybe I'd give him a D for that. But like Iraq, Afghanistan, I mean, he was like a fish that always take the bait no matter
Mm.
when.
Yeah.
Couldn't
Yeah.
hold his guns back, and he really blew it. F.
Well, that brings us to
The
our
only
first.
president to share a podcast with Bruce Springsteen.
Yep,
Barack Obama's
Barack
a B.
Obama.
Barack Obama's a B.
That's fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Even though he's Bush 3,
He's
what
Bush
did he do
three,
better?
sure, but he at least took the gangster administration of George Bush and put some guardrails and some regulation around it and put some legalities to it so that there's a way to actually try some of the stuff in court if presidents in the future do it. It's like he did put some safety handles on those things. Any president would be a war criminal at that point. Any of those presidents who were running, there were no non-war criminals running in 2008. And he didn't really do that much that was good, but he kept the country in a kind of a holding pattern, that where we were slowly recovering from the economic crisis. And I still think that it's underestimated how much of a positive impact it was to have a black president, even though it didn't solve racism, obviously, and it made racism worse in a lot of ways. At least he was able to sort of make people totally reimagine what the presidency was and who in a society can climb the ladder, who is coded as somebody who can have a chance in America. I think his becoming president was a huge step forward. So I'll give him a B.
I'd say the best thing about Obama was his presence and being able to go around to different countries and really bring America back to prominence in that he was a respectable guy. And I mean, gosh darn it, wasn't it cool to be in Biden? Sorry, to be in Barack's America. All right, we're down to a one that could only be contentious. I mean, like literally, even putting him on any tier is going to make a bunch of people upset. What you doing with the Don, Johnny?
The Don. So Donald Trump is a tough one because I think that in a lot of ways, if you look at what he was able to accomplish in terms of being a reality TV show star who became the president of the United States by becoming huge on Twitter, that's unbelievable. That's like the fact that he became president at all is like part of what at least gets him out of the F section, just because it's just amazing that he was able to become president.
You're fired.
Yeah, I think that if he wasn't so
Okay.
divisive all the time, and if he wasn't insistent on stepping into every single fight and having a comment about every single thing that was going on, he could have actually probably led the country a lot better than he ultimately did. If he could have just thought of a way to like, if he could, he's good when he can fire his guns in the right direction, but all he does is fire his guns no matter what happens. He's another one like Bush that
I
always
say
takes
all
a
the
beat.
time. I wish he was like a better person because he is effective and he's popular.
Very funny.
Not everywhere, but like in certain parts of the country, he's very well liked.
So his presidency wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and he was able to get some things done, though not a lot, and not everything he got done was my favorite. The problem with him is that a legend has grown up around him, and his supporters, some of them are like religiously attached to him, which is never a good thing. And
Yeah.
He knows this, and he does not discourage this in any way. The last
he wants
thing,
it.
yeah, he wants it. The thing that really makes him a D is his and I'm sorry, but he's the only one on this list other than Andrew Jackson in 1824 who didn't accept the results of his election. And he not only didn't accept the results of his election, but he inspired a riot in the Capitol before he left. That was the last thing he did. So
yeah.
I can't, that's something I can't give points to that. Like, I'm not trying to be a finger wagging, you're bad if you like Trump person. We can argue about Trump's policies, and maybe if we had a different tier list with policies, he might get a higher grade. But we're doing a who did the best job with the presidency. If you get the presidency and you do that, that's a huge minus.
So if he left the country more divided than when he got in, where would you put our current president, Jean Bidon?
So Joe Biden.
Oh, that's well done.
Oh my God. So clearly he can't be on the same tier as Barack Obama. What is that? What do you keep doing?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay. So I don't think he could be on the same tier as Barack Obama.
Sure. And he probably can't be on the same tier as Trump.
I could see him being on a Benjamin Harrison level.
Is he? You think he's around Jimmy Carter?
Yeah, he kind of is like a Jimmy Carter, where it's like he actually is getting a lot of stuff done, but he's also missing a lot of important chances. He's he's a little bit out of touch with the country. Although this is a good week. This week has been a good week for Biden. I don't know if you know, but like he gave a speech to the Congress and he did this like thing. He got the Republicans to cheer for Social Security, so he made himself look like he was defending the country from the Republicans taking the Social Security away. So that was a really amazing move that like only a guy who's been in the Senate that long as Biden could have figured out. And he does sort of play the Mr. Magoo a lot of times, like the I'm just a stuttering old man, and then suddenly like at the right moment he knows how to turn it on, and it's kind of interesting to watch him with all of his disadvantages, his age, his cognitive functioning not being so great. He's actually getting through this despite what everyone said would happen, and he's passing a lot of his agenda. Not everything, but so I guess give him a C.
That would be an awesome.
Oh, that's 9 people
portrait.
in the C. That's overloaded.
That makes sense, though.
That's over the load. Oh
no!
Yeah.
Look at that, though.
You want to?
No,
we got to move somebody to C or D.
All right,
So
you can
B or D.
You can put
come on, that makes sense.
You can put John Tyler in the F category.
Wow. Langdon, do you even remember which guy that is?
Yeah, but that doesn't solve the issue with C. Oh wait, shit.
No. Then put Andrew Jackson in the D.
Andrew Jackson getting the D, okay.
And then just put Biden in that missing slot, and we're done.
Oh, shit. Boom. The perfect tier list.
Okay, everybody, take a look. This is the final presidential tier list. Again, I think presidential tier lists are really dumb, and I don't respect even the one I made. So you can comment all you want about my choices and my reasoning. I was going off the cuff. I mean, comment, please comment. You know, if you want to write a manifesto under this video,
do it.
Whatever, it helps the algorithm. But I consider these to be dumb, and I'm only doing this for fun. So thanks, everybody. Please subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed what you saw, and please stay tuned. As many of you know, I'm in graduate school right now, and I don't make videos as often as I used to, but I still make videos, so there's going to be some more documentaries coming up. Happy President's Day, everyone, from One Human History.
Bye, y'all.
Good night.